Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Greetings and welcome to today's program, this meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California. I'm Patty James of the club's Health and Medicine member-led forum and chair of this program. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Robert Lustig. Dr. Lustig is a professor emeritus of pediatrics in the Division of Endocrinology and member of the Institute for Health Policy Studies at the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Lustig is a neuroendocrinologist and an international authority on obesity, diabetes, nutrition, and neuroscience. Dr. Lustig graduated from MIT in 1976 and received his MD from Cornell University Medical College in 1980. He completed his pediatric residency at St. Louis Children's Hospital in 1983 and the clinical fellowship at UCSF in 1984. From there, he spent 6 years at a research association in neuroendocrinology at the Rockefeller University. In 2013, he received his master's studies of law from UC Hastings. Dr. Lustig is one of the leaders of the global anti-sugar and real food movements to improve global health. He is author of over 200 academic works, which connect the science of food and metabolism to the policy and the politics of obesity and diabetes pandemics. He also comments on the role of industry tactics to promote hedonic substances and behaviors and the resulting aftermath of healthcare and societal devolution. Dr. Lustig is the author of the New York Times bestsellers Fat Chance, Beating the Odds Against Sugar, Processed Food, Obesity and Disease, The Hacking of the American Mind, The Science Behind the Corporate Takeover of Our Bodies and Brains, and of course, the reason that we're here today and that he'll be talking about his book, new book, Metabolical, The Lure and Lies of Processed Food, Nutrition, and Modern Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Lustig.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Patty. I got to tell you, I don't know who you were talking about, but that was a really long introduction.
You did all that. It's amazing, isn't it? Wow. Well, and that was the short version, just so you know. So you're a physician who also went to law school. And in my mind, Metabolical is you making your case. So you weave together the dangers of processed foods and what it's doing to our bodies, nutrition, or the lack thereof, as well as modern medicine, which a no-holds-bar approach to certain medical establishments, such as the American Diabetes Association and others, and of course, the effect that the aforementioned have on our economy. We're not going to talk a lot about economy today because I do know you're talking to Jeffrey Sachs, the very well-known economist at the end of the month. So let's start with how is Metabolical different from Fat Chance? And then after that, we'll go into the two main tenets, which I'll talk about in a moment. So
Right.
How's it different?
Thanks for asking. So the standard mantra that, the world learned was you are what you eat. And when I started doing research, it became very clear that that was not the case. And so in Fat Chance, I stated my case that, in fact, you are what you do with what you eat, that actually metabolism is even more important than nutrients or calories. Well, to be honest with you, I got it wrong too. And over the last 8 years, more and more data has come forward, and I came to realize I needed to restate it as well. And now Metabolical states you are what they did with what you eat. In fact, it's the food processing that takes food and turns it into poison. It's basically a wicked alchemy that makes you think you're eating healthy, but actually killing yourself. And that sounds rash and it sounds strident, but in fact, that's what the data show.
Okay. Yeah. So everything in this book, and again, we talked a little bit about everything that's in this book, but everything in the book goes back to two main tenets, and that is protect the liver and feed the gut. So let's start there, and then we'll go into chronic illnesses, and then what are we having for dinner based on everything that we've just learned. So the liver, what are we protecting it from?
Right. So first of all, you have to understand that nobody knows what the word healthy means. Mm-hmm. In fact, the FDA has a definition, and it's ridiculous. It says low in saturated fat, has vitamin D and enough potassium and magnesium.
Folate? Yeah.
No, it doesn't even say folate.
Oh, okay.
USDA refuses to define healthy, in part because then if they defined it, then the food industry couldn't put healthy all over its packaging. The fact of the matter is no one knows what healthy is. And so, people get away with truly murder. I define it, and I define it scientifically. And the two precepts are protect the liver, feed the gut. Mm-hmm. Any food that does both is healthy. Any food that does neither is poison. And any food that does one or the other, but not both, is somewhere in the middle. And the empiric data actually bear this out. All right, so protect the liver. Protect it from what? Protect it from the onslaught of mono and disaccharides, simple sugars, and starch breaking down to glucose, because the liver has a limited capacity to metabolize those molecules. And if you overwhelm the liver's capacity, if you provide a tsunami of sugar early on in the duodenum, after the stomach, it goes straight to the liver. The liver can't handle it, and it takes the excess and turns it into liver fat. And that's when chronic disease starts. If the liver can export it out, it's triglyceride, and it's a setup for heart disease or for obesity. If the liver can't export it out, then it precipitates in the liver as a lipid droplet. Now you've got non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and you have the setup for type 2 diabetes and cirrhosis and all the other diseases that go along with insulin resistance, such as cancer and Alzheimer's. So bottom line, protect the liver. And you also have to protect it from branched chain amino acids, which most people think are good. And if you're building muscle, they are good. But if you're not building muscle, then they get turned into liver fat as well. Protect it from iron, which is an oxidative stress. Protect it from glyphosate, Roundup. Protect it from heavy metals, which, we've now found in baby food. So protect the liver. The liver is your detoxification organ, but it has a breaking point, and we are way beyond it. So that's part one. Mm-hmm. Part two, feed the gut. Feed the gut what? Well, the gut, the bacteria in your gut, they eat what you eat. The question is, how much did you get versus how much did they get? If you starve the gut gets unhappy. Those bacteria will feed on you. They will strip the mucin layer right off your intestinal epithelial cells to provide its own food at your expense. And now the bacteria are opposed right to your intestinal epithelial cell with no barrier. And that starts in irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, leaky gut, the transfer of cytokines and lipopolysaccharides and whole bacteria into your portal vein. Now you've got systemic inflammation. And that, if it even gets to the brain, can actually cause behavioral health disorders such as depression or even psychiatric disease like psychosis. Okay. So the bottom line is you have to feed your bacteria. If you feed your bacteria will be happy. And the question is, well, what do they eat? Well, they love fiber. Soluble and insoluble. And unfortunately, processed food, of course, is fiberless food on purpose because you can't freeze fiber. Mm-hmm. Prove it. Take an orange, put it in your freezer overnight, take it out the next day, let it thaw, try to eat it, see what you get. You get mush. How come you get mush? The ice crystals macerate the cell wall inside the orange. The water rushes in, turns it to mush. Hey, food industry knows that, but they can squeeze it and freeze it, and now it lasts forever. Now it's frozen concentrated orange juice. You can sell it on the commodities exchange, storable food. So an orange is not a commodity, but orange juice is. All right. So they've processed it to reduce depreciation, increase profit. The problem is They just deprived your microbiome of what it needs to survive. And so you get sick.
Yeah. Let's go back to the liver for a little bit. I've heard you say that there are, when people go for their yearly physicals, sometimes they have their liver tested, just, I want my liver tested. How's my liver doing type thing. But
Yep.
you mentioned that the lab tests have changed since the 1970s, basically that the goalposts have moved. So talk about if somebody wants to make sure that their liver is healthy, or then what lab tests should they get, and what are their doctors going to tell them?
Right. So the biggest issue is that your doctor doesn't know how to figure this out. And I know because I'm the one who has to teach it at UCSF. So I know what they're teaching, and I know what doctors are not learning. So you order your chem panel, your doctor gets your chem panel, and a whole bunch of tests come back. One of those tests is particularly interesting. It's called an ALT, alanine aminotransferase. Now, next to the ALT will be your number, and then there'll be a column where it'll say high or low. Okay, and it'll say the reference range. Now, that reference range says that an ALT up to the number 40 is fine. That's the break point for abnormal, is 40. No, it isn't. It's 25.
Yeah.
Now, how do I know that? Because when I entered medical school in 1976, the upper limit for ALT was 25. But today, the upper limit for ALT, same assay, is 40. How come?
Yeah.
Answer, because everyone has fatty liver disease today. 45% of adults in America have fatty liver disease, and nobody had fatty liver disease except alcoholics back in 1976. The entire curve has shifted to the right. Now, the lab doesn't know that. The lab thinks, they're healthy, so they take, the median, and they find 2 standard deviations from the mean, and that's where they do the cut points. And that happens to be at 40. So they say, well, if you're below 40, it's normal. So you go to your doctor and you've got a 33 on your ALT, and the doctor says, well, your tests are normal. No, they're not even remotely. Point is, and that's very sensitive, not specific, but very sensitive, that mm-hmm. ALT. Mm-hmm. Your doctor doesn't know that because your doctor wasn't in medical school in 1976. So how are they going to figure this out when that's not what's there? A second test. Very similar, uric acid. Yeah. So uric acid is what causes gout. It also causes hypertension. It also is a marker for metabolic syndrome as well. The upper limit of normal on the lab slip is 7. No, it's not. It's 5.5. If you have a uric acid over 5.5, that's a question mark, to be sure. And the reason is it's a proxy for sugar consumption. It's also a proxy for protein consumption, but it's a proxy for sugar consumption. So more sugar means more ATP loss because the fructose has to be phosphorylated, and there goes the ATP down to ADP, and then that goes to uric acid. Uric acid is the endogenous inhibitor of an enzyme in your blood vessels that keep your blood pressure down, called endogenous nitric oxide synthase. So if you inhibit that, your blood pressure goes up. So, people think salt is the big problem with blood pressure. Our ancestors, because everything was salt packed and salt cured back on those schooners back in the Atlantic Ocean before there were, steam engines or refrigerators, they had to basically pack all the fish in salt. Our ancestors consumed like 15 grams of salt a day, and they didn't have hypertension. And the reason was because their kidneys could excrete out the rest. But insulin, the hormone insulin, causes the kidney to resorb all of that excess sodium. And that's what raises the blood pressure. The question is, how come the insulin's high? It's the sugar. Mm-hmm. So if you get rid of the sugar in your diet, you can actually excrete all that sodium and your blood pressure will go down. And I actually wrote a paper years ago, just a spoonful of sugar helps the blood pressure go up. So you got all these people worried about salt. Really what they should be worried about is sugar.
Well, gout used to be called, the disease of a rich person who could afford to eat that kind of food.
That's right.
And now it's sort of the opposite. It's the junky food. And then you talk about insulin and you talk about sugar and we talk about fatty liver. And it's all tied in, sugar, but the ultra processed food. I think when people, next time everybody who's listening goes to their doctor and wants to get their liver tested based on what you just told us that they should be doing and watching for, I think a lot of people right now think, well, I don't drink that much alcohol, so my liver's fine, without putting it in their heads that alcohol is damaging, but it's the ultra processed food that's doing the bulk of the damage.
Well, in particular, the sugar in the ultra processed food. So 56% of all of the food consumed in America today is ultra processed, and that's 62% of the sugar load is in the ultra processed food. So, you are getting a big dose if you are basically, going into the aisles at the supermarket. That's where it's coming from. People say, well, how can sugar be doing that? And the answer is sugar is like alcohol, because sugar and alcohol are metabolized in the liver virtually identically. And it makes sense that would be the case, because after all, where do you get alcohol from? Fermentation of sugar. It's called wine. We do it in Napa and Sonoma every day. The big difference between the two is that for alcohol, the yeast does the first step of metabolism called glycolysis. For sugar, we do our own first step. But after that, the intermediate pyruvate that goes to the mitochondria don't care where it came from. All it knows is it's being overwhelmed. And then it has no choice but to take the excess and divert it via a process called de novo lipogenesis into liver fat. And once that liver fat gets made, that's when the chronic disease starts. And that's what the empiric data show. And 45% of Americans now have fatty liver disease when 0% had it in 1980.
So two things. And of course, children and fatty liver disease. There's two things, but that's right. the first one that comes to mind right now. So talk about children and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Right. So, children don't drink alcohol.
Yeah.
20% of children who die at autopsy have fatty liver today, and 40% of obese children. And the question is, well, where did the fat come from? Well, if it didn't come from alcohol, where it came from the sugar. And that's why children now get two diseases of alcohol, type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease. These were the diseases of alcoholics. These were the diseases of aging. And now 5-year-olds get it. Okay. And that's one of the reasons why I had to write this book, is to make people understand that children are the canaries in the coal mine. If children are getting the diseases of aging, if they're getting the diseases of alcohol, okay, something's wrong. So the question is, what's wrong? Well, it's the ultra processed food, and the science shows it.
Now, I want to talk about glucose, but first, let's finish up something on ultra processed food. There's processed food and there's ultra processed food. Hamburgers are processed food. It's been ground up,
Sure.
So there's that. So explain the difference between processed food
Sure.
and ultra processed food.
So my colleague, Dr. Carlos Monteiro at the University of Sao Paulo, has set up a very good method for thinking this out.
It's amazing.
It's called the NOVA system. And I like it very much. And it actually, the data fit, it's been validated. Mm-hmm. So here's a way to think about it. Let's take an apple. All right. An apple is unprocessed, and an apple also does not have a food label, because you don't need a food label for nothing, for a food that's nothing's been done to. So there's no food label for an apple or for a broccoli or for a radish or for an orange, for that matter. Okay. That's NOVA class 1. Next, let's take apple slices. So it's been processed, it's been sliced, it's been potentially destemmed. Maybe the seeds have been removed, et cetera. Okay. And they put them in a, plastic bag. That's got a food label because something's been done to it. That's NOVA class 2. Not too bad.
Okay.
Next, let's take applesauce. So applesauce has gone through a Vitamix or a Breville or something to basically, chew the fiber to smithereens. Maybe sugar's been added, maybe not. Some are unsweetened. Okay. That would be NOVA class 3. And finally, let's take an apple drink. Okay. like in one of those little packages, like a Capri Sun. Okay. Is there any apple left in that? Well, maybe there's a little bit of juice that started it, but there's also preservatives and there's added sugar, et cetera, and all the fiber has been removed. That would be Nova Class 4. So you go from apple to apple slice to apple sauce to apple drink. And it's the apple drink that's the dangerous one. Now, people might say they understand that. Oh, yeah, okay, fine. But in fact, that's 56% of our current diet. And that's what's killing us. And there's data from France, there's data from the UK, there's data from the US now that demonstrate it's that Nova Class 4 that predicts disease. And that, unfortunately, is what the food industry is selling. 90% of the food in our diet today is controlled by 10 conglomerates. Bottom line, if a food has a logo you've heard of, it's ultra processed.
And it's also all the, the food colorings that I don't generally walk down the food aisle or the soda aisle. I don't need that kind of food, but you walk down and all the colors that, you're an onslaught of colors. And I see the other day, a couple of days ago, that the EU is now warning not to consume titanium dioxide. And so it's the apple is, like you said, the class 4 is maybe an ultra processed food, but I think of things also that people eat all the time, which are chips and candy and cereal. If you want to call it cereal, it's really just sugar, that have all these additives in it. And I've heard you say it's not just the food, it's what they do to the food. I think you mentioned that earlier, but it's all the additives.
That's right. It's not what's in the food, it's what's been done to the food that matters. All food is inherently good. It's what we do to the food that's not. Mm-hmm. Let me give you another example. Okay. Meat. Yeah. So you buy the meat in the store and there's no food label, right?
Right.
Okay. So you think everything's okay, right? Not necessarily. Depends. That if that animal grew up on a CAFO, on a concentrated animal feeding operation, say in Kansas, okay, where it's lying in its own excrement, that animal, in order to survive, so that animal didn't die of dysentery of its own, of the bacteria from some other cow, okay, they had to pump that animal full of antibiotics. Okay, and those antibiotics, guess what? They've changed that cow's microbiome. And we can talk about the methane story because that's where the methane comes from, is the change of the cow's microbiome, but it also pervades the meat. Yeah. And so then we eat that meat, it changes our microbiome. And so now we are not feeding the gut, we are actually causing gut dysfunction in the process. And that food you would think is non-processed. Well, actually, if it's grown on if that animal has been fed on a CAFO, it's processed too. So, you have to know the tricks of the trade. You have to know what's been done to the food. And the problem is that's not on the label. And the food industry doesn't have to disclose any of that, which is why I had to write the book.
Mm-hmm. So I want to explain to those listening, if you see me looking over, not at you or not at Rob, Dr. Lustig, I'm looking at my questions, which I haven't looked at all, quite frankly. And I have a lot of audience questions that I'm going to read to see if it's appropriate to ask any of them now. But in the meantime, you mentioned insulin, but you haven't explained glucose. So if you would, insulin, but glucose, while I listen and read these comments.
Absolutely. So the point is, people think glucose is the problem. The glucose excursion, the rise in the glucose is the problem. Well, in fact, the rise in the glucose is really a proxy for the rise in insulin, because the higher the glucose goes, the higher the insulin goes. And it's that insulin that drives the chronic metabolic disease. So what does insulin do? Well, diabetics take shots of insulin. It lowers blood glucose. I hear you. Okay. And God knows if you're a diabetic and you're on insulin, I'm not telling you to stop your insulin shots. Yeah. However, you have to understand that insulin has two functions. The first is metabolic, and the second is cell growth. There are two separate signal transduction pathways in each cell. One is to take up glucose, and that will lower the blood sugar, and that will help with retinopathy, nephropathy, neuropathy, because high blood glucose causes small vessel disease. Okay? And so that's one of the reasons why diabetics have to get their blood glucose down. They have to get their hemoglobin A1C down, is to prevent retinopathy, nephropathy, neuropathy. And I'm for that. I'm not against that. That's good. However, the insulin also drives a second pathway called MAP kinase, and that causes cell division. It causes coronary artery muscle, smooth muscle, cell division. Well, that tightens up your coronary arteries and makes it much more likely you'll have a heart attack. It does the same thing in your carotid arteries. That's more likely you're going to get a stroke. And also, that insulin is driving breast glandular cells, causing increase in division rate and making it much more likely you will end up with cancer. And we have learned that insulin is the driver, not of cancer initiation, but of cancer growth. So you got to get the insulin down. Now, glucose is the thing that makes insulin go up, right? That's one of the reasons why the ketogenic diet has taken, the world by storm, if you will, is because it keeps your glucose down, therefore it keeps your insulin down. And that is true if you can stay on it, which is not so easy, and it's actually very difficult to stay on the ketogenic diet. But what's missing from that calculus is the fructose. So the fructose is the sweet molecule in sugar. It doesn't raise the serum glucose. It raises the serum fructose. You don't measure that in the glucose test. And it turns out that serum fructose is way more dangerous, way worse, 7 times worse. And actually at the liver, it's 250 times worse. And we have now learned that it is that fructose, even though it doesn't make the insulin go up immediately, it causes the chronic metabolic disease because it generates the insulin resistance in your cells, particularly in your liver. And that raises insulin levels all over the body. And now chronic disease is off to the races.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to mention right now, and then it's appropriate to ask some of these questions. But first, I want to tell people when you do get Dr. Leslie's book and read it, which I recommend that you do. It's amazing. There are no references in the back because there are 1,100 references, and it would have made the book 70-page longer and cost what do you say, $5
more? Yeah.
Yeah. So all the references, everything that Dr. Lustig is talking about today is available. All the references are in the book, but they're not actually printed in the book. It's the first time that HarperCollins has ever done this because there's so many references. It's actually available online. I just wanted to mention that briefly.
So you can go to metabolical.com.
Yeah.
And that will, and you will see all the references. Sorry about that. You'll see all the references, 1,054 references to the primary literature. Okay. We're not talking about, newspaper, fan mail. We're talking about, hardcore science for those of you. And I actually wrote this book to be usable in medical schools, to teach nutrition to medical students. Right. And so it's got all the data and all the references needed to, make the case.
Okay. So some of these questions might be more appropriate for when we get to the diet section at the end of our talk today, keto and vegan and everything else. But like the very first question here is about GMOs. We're going to get back to that. But I think you've already brought up branched chain amino acids, and there are questions. That one question is about, would you not consume protein powder as a protein supplement unless the individual is working to build muscle? I believe you already answered that. You say that too many branched chain amino acids are not good for you, but so unless you're building muscle, you would not recommend protein powder as a protein supplement.
That's right. I mean, basically, muscle is 20% branched chain amino acids. So if you're building muscle and you're pumping iron and you're going to the gym and you're a gym rat, then have at it, because that's, you can't build the muscle without those branched amino acids, and they're all essential amino acids. You have to consume them. Your body can't make them. So I understand that. However, what if you're not a bodybuilder? What if you're a mere mortal like me and you're consuming excess branched chain amino acids, which, by the way, are higher in corn-fed beef, chicken, and fish. Okay, because that's what's in corn, those branched chain amino acids. Well, now those branched chain amino acids go to the liver. I mean, you're not building muscle, so you've got this excess. What happens to it? They go to the liver takes the amino group off. Now they're branched chain organic acids. They enter the Krebs cycle, the tricarboxylic acid cycle, which burns it to go to ATP. It overwhelms the mitochondria's capacity to be able to do it, throws it off as citrate, and then that citrate then causes that phenomenon called de novo lipogenesis that I mentioned earlier, new fat making. So branched chain amino acids result in liver fat and insulin resistance also. And this is work of Dr. Christopher Newgard at Duke University.
Okay. Impact of the processed food, which we're also talking about now, but on the brain, you mentioned the brain. I think you might have already answered this question because you mentioned the brain a little bit. So is there something that you want to add about highly processed food and brain? You did say they can lead to, depression and other things, but.
So we've always assumed glucose is the energy of the brain, and that is true, it is. But we're also learning that fructose gets across. We never thought it did, but it does. And it seems to actually poison mitochondria. It poisons mitochondria in the liver, that we're sure of, and it seems to poison mitochondria, not in the neurons per se, but in the astrocytes. And the astrocytes are the ones that feed the neurons. And so if those mitochondria are being altered and are now defective, you can imagine that might have effects on cognitive function, might have effects on behavioral health. And so we are now learning that, that there are certain metabolic abnormalities in the brain of people with, for instance, major depressive disorder, possibly schizophrenia. And now there's a whole move afoot on using the ketogenic diet to treat, for instance, bipolar disorder. In fact, I just had a meeting about this issue just yesterday at UCSF. So there is, there's a wealth of information about how food affects the brain, and probably the single most problematic foodstuff in terms of brain health is sugar.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions about fruit. Because you mentioned, orange juice and you freeze it and then, and people asking, well, I buy frozen berries. Is that not good now? How many pieces of fruit can I eat a day? And also, it's a fruit, but it's been fermented. How much alcohol can I drink? So lots of questions about fruit. Talk about fruit a little bit, because people.
So everybody wants to know about fruit. I mean, they hear fructose and they go, fructose and fruit. Yes. Well, right. The amount of sugar in any fruit, is dwarfed by the amount of fiber, and the fiber it prevents that sugar absorption from the gut into the bloodstream. You are protecting the liver. So there are two kinds of fiber in fruit: soluble and insoluble. Okay, soluble is like pectins or inulin, things that would hold jelly together.
Yeah.
Cellulose is like insoluble fiber, the stringy stuff in celery. All right. So you need both. Fruit has both. Now, if you consume a whole piece of fruit, you are getting both. And what happens is the insoluble fiber forms a lattice work on the inside of the duodenum, like a fishnet. The soluble fiber are globular. Those molecules are globular. They plug the holes in the fishnet. You can actually see it on electron microscopy, this whitish gel that forms on the inside of the duodenum. And that acts as a secondary barrier. And that prevents early absorption of all of those mono and disaccharides, all that sugar, from getting to the liver. So you are protecting the liver. Well, if you don't absorb it early, what happens to it? Well, it goes further down the intestine, goes to the next part of the intestine called the jejunum, and that's where the bacteria are. And so the bacteria will chew it up for its own purposes. So even though you consumed it, even though it passed your lips, even though it registered as a, quote, calorie, unquote.
We'll do that later.
In fact, you never absorbed it because your bacteria got it instead. So you are feeding your gut. So you're protecting your liver and you're feeding your gut. So even though you consumed the fruit, the sugar wasn't for you. It was for your microbiome. So fruit is fine. Now, if you strain that fiber out, if you put it in a Breville or a Vitamix and you basically destroy the insoluble fiber and shear it to smithereens, you can't set up that fish net. You've basically cut too many holes in the fish net for it to work, to be a barrier. And now the mono and disaccharides will flood your liver, just like I talked about before. And so that's not so good. Now, the soluble fiber will still be there, so you might be feeding your gut. And this is a case, like I said at the beginning, where, it doesn't do one of the two things. It doesn't protect your liver, but it does feed your gut. And so the data show that juice is sort of halfway in between. It's not as good as fruit, but it's better than, say, soda.
Yeah. So for people, and again, I'm jumping the gun but you mentioned smoothies already. So, and I've heard you say before, and you just said it, try not to have fruit smoothies because you've just, as you put it, made them into, no longer useful or as useful as they could be. So eat the fruit. And if you're going to have a smoothie, make sure it's mostly vegetables with maybe.
Right. If it's a green smoothie, there's nothing to protect the liver from.
Got it.
In which case, then it's not a big problem. But fruit smoothies can be an issue.
Okay, 2 more questions and then we're going to move on to diets. But before going back a little bit, because we talked about lab tests and what to ask your doctor for with regards to your liver. But how do you test? The question is, how do you test for glucose and insulin?
Well, so you can do a fasting glucose and insulin. That's what is typically done, and you should. Now, I will tell you that I believe fasting insulin is probably the single best lab test to determine metabolic health. The American Diabetes Association says very specifically on its website that you should not do this. You should not check fasting insulin. And I think it's the single best test there is. Now, why is this? That the American Diabetes Association says one thing and I'm saying the exact opposite. Why is that? Here's why.
Okay.
Number one, they say that fasting insulin is not consistent across different laboratories. Okay. It's an inconsistent assay. That's almost true.
Yeah.
There's some truth to that. So it turns out there is a species of insulin that is released from your pancreas when your pancreas is stressed called proinsulin. Now, proinsulin only has 5% of the activity of insulin. When your beta cells in your pancreas are chugging like crazy as they are in diabetes, okay, it doesn't have time to cleave the C-peptide out of the proinsulin molecule to create the insulin and then package the insulin into vesicles and get it out because it's working overtime. And so it will end up releasing the proinsulin. And the proinsulin in bad insulin assays can be mistaken for the actual insulin molecule itself because they look a lot alike. Because, after all, one's the precursor of the other. So it is true that bad insulin assays will measure proinsulin, but that's actually the point. And if it's high, that's telling you that your beta cells are not happy. So that's really kind of a dumb reason not to do it, for the ADA. Mm-hmm. Second reason, they say fasting insulin doesn't correlate with obesity. And that is true also. Who said it should? In fact, there are a lot of reasons for obesity other than insulin resistance. Fasting insulin tells you about insulin resistance. There are a lot of reasons for weight gain having nothing to do with that fasting insulin. The point is, fasting insulin is a very good indicator of metabolic health. And lots of thin people are metabolically ill too. In fact, 40% of thin people are metabolically ill. And how would they know if they didn't get a fasting insulin?
And there's an actual medical term for that, right? Thin on the inside, thin on the outside, fat on the inside.
That's right. It's called TOFI, T-O-F-I, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. So that's one of the best ways to figure out whether you're a TOFI. It's one of the first things your doctor should be doing. So the bottom line is the ADA has their reasons for saying no. And I'm telling you, that's why I wrote the book.
Somebody asked a question, and it really isn't appropriate, except I had a little chuckle privately here. Which companies do we sue?
Well, That's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, all I can say is that there are several lawsuits against the food industry for different things and for specific things. I know about a fair number of them because I actually serve as an expert witness in an attempt to try to fix this problem. I will say I do not have any vested interest in the outcome of those trials. I'm not here as a shill for the plaintiff's bar.
Yeah, this is the one we talked about last week. About processed food and how sugar isn't really a danger. Well, I don't want to talk names, so I'll take that back. But anyway, can fatty liver disease be reversed?
So there's fatty liver, and then there's fatty liver plus inflammation. So fatty liver is called hepatic steatosis. Fatty liver plus inflammation is called non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. Now, most of the people who have fatty liver disease have just fatty liver without inflammation, just steatosis. And if you have just steatosis, you can absolutely reverse it. Once you pass over the threshold to inflammation, then the scarring starts. And when the scarring starts, that cannot be reversed. Then it's forever. And so the goal is to make sure you've reversed this before you get to that point. Because once the scarring starts, then you are on your way to cirrhosis. Okay. And now non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is the leading cause of liver transplant in the United States, having overtaken hepatitis C. And the reason is because people don't know they have fatty liver because their doctor thinks that an ALT of 33 is okay. And all of a sudden, now they've got fatty liver plus inflammation, and now they've got a problem that won't go away. So the goal is to figure this out before the point of no return. Another reason I wrote the book.
Mm-hmm. So lots of great questions. It's hard to know which ones to read. But this is kind of more of a comment than a question. It's kind of a nice comment. Lots of nice comments thanking you for this book and how everybody should have it and read it. And I definitely agree. But this person says, my daughter has Crohn's disease and has achieved clinical remission through diet alone, eating only real food, no meds, which more doctors would realize the value of nutrition for healing. Boy, isn't that the truth, right?
Well, I'm not going to tell you I know this because I don't. I've only have anecdotal evidence, and that is not evidence. And I'm very clear that ends of one are not science. However, I've had many people with Crohn's disease tell me that when they got off processed food, their Crohn's disease got better. Mm-hmm. That's a relatively common refrain. Now, that doesn't mean that ultra-processed food is the cause of Crohn's, but it is interesting that so many people seem to get better.
Right. And for those who aren't in this world, perhaps they might not know what the N of 1 means. So maybe just explain the N of 1 that you. Well,
I'm a scientist. Okay. Right. And, an N of 1 means an anecdote, one person, and it means that it wasn't done scientifically. Okay. Right. I'm a scientist. I believe in data. I believe in statistics. You have to prove things to me. Okay. But once you've proven them to me, I adopt them. The problem with the medical profession is you can provide some, proof to some people and they will never change their minds because they are completely recalcitrant. They are calcified in their beliefs. And the reason invariably is because they have money riding on it, like grant money or, they've written their own book or whatever. Right.
So I've heard you say that certain disease states, such as type 2 diabetes, are the symptoms and not the problem. Quote, real diseases are the subcellular pathways, unquote. But before you dial into that, I want to briefly also talk about COVID. And here's another quote from you. I've heard COVID-19 referred to as a beast because it doesn't distinguish. It doesn't distinguish. In point of fact, it does distinguish who doesn't distinguish who it infects, but it does distinguish who it kills. Other than the elderly, it's those who are Black, obese, and or have pre-existing conditions. What distinguish these three demographics? Ultra-processed food, because the ultra-processed food sets you up for inflammation, which COVID-19 is happy to exploit. Just another way processed food kills. Time to rethink your menu. So talk about that as you talk about what does real diseases or the subcellular pathologies mean?
Sure. So let's talk about COVID first.
Yeah.
My nonprofit called Eat Real, and you can find it online, eatreal.org. And we are getting real food into schools all over the country because, American schools are the largest fast food franchise in the world. We got to fix that. We published a medical alert where we basically called out the NIH and the CDC for screwing up. And I mean that very specifically. They screwed up. Here's how. They've told us 3 things to do. And I'm all for those 3 things: masking, social distancing, hand washing. I'm for those. But they didn't tell us about the 4th.
Yeah.
The food. You never hear anyone at NIH or CDC ever mention the food. Turns out those 3 groups, those 3 demographics, BIPOC, obese, pre-existing conditions, they share one thing in common: ultra-processed food. So why does ultra-processed food make people with COVID die? Answer: 3 ways. First, the virus is very smart. It uses a receptor on virtually every cell in your body as its injector point. And it's called ACE2, angiotensin converting enzyme 2, happens to be an endocrine receptor, something I take care of, involved in water transport. The more ACE2 receptors, the more infective the COVID virus is. Well, turns out insulin resistance, high insulin levels, drive those ACE2 receptors up, giving the virus more of a chance to infect all your cells at once. Therefore, a bigger viral load. Number 2, the lack of fiber. The lack of fiber, those colonic bacteria love that soluble fiber. They turn that soluble fiber into short-chain fatty acids called butyrate and propionate. And these have been shown to be immune suppressive. They suppress the cytokine storm of COVID-19. And they also are anti-insulin, so they help prevent weight gain too. So the fiber helps mitigate the COVID nastiness, if you will. But the problem is ultra-processed food is fiberless food. And then finally, number 3, diabetes itself, high blood glucose. The glucose crystallizes around the edges of those ACE2s and holds it open so that the virus has an even easier time to inject. So bottom line, ultra-processed food doesn't cause you to get infected with COVID. That's what the hand washing and the masking and the social distancing is supposed to prevent. It's supposed to prevent infectivity. But morbidity and mortality, it's about the food. And you don't hear the NIH or CDC saying word one about this. Okay. And so I have a bone to pick with Tony Fauci.
Okay.
For not dealing with it.
Let's pick it. What is it exactly?
Well, that's it.
You want him to focus more on food. On
the food. They should have been doing this from the beginning. We showed at UCSF back in 2015 that we can reverse the metabolic health, the metabolic dysfunction in any kid in 9 days flat by getting sugar out of kids' diets.
That's one of my questions.
Starch.
Yeah. Talk about that study, because I think that's absolutely fascinating. And that will segue into the diet questions I have and the diet questions that most of our listeners have. So first, talk about that amazing study you did with children.
So we call this the KIDS study. We took 43 children from our obesity clinic at UCSF, Latino and African American, so low socioeconomic status, all high processed food consumers, all high sugar consumers. And what we did was we studied them on their home diet at baseline. And then for the next 9 days, we catered their meals, no added sugar. We took the percent of calories from sugar in their diet from 28% down to 10%. We gave them fruit. That's where they got their sugar. But all the other food was no added sugar. Now, if you remove that percent from 28 to 10, you're going to lose about 350 to 400 calories a day out of the diet. And if you do that for 10 days, you might lose weight. We didn't want our patients to lose weight because if they lost weight and they got better, people will say, of course they got better, they lost weight. We didn't want them to lose weight. We wanted them to stay the same weight or even gain.
Right.
Right. So what we did was we took the sugar out. What we did was we put the excess starch in. Okay, we gave them processed starch. So in the vernacular, we took the pastries out, we put the bagels in. We took the sweetened yogurt out, we put the baked potato chips in. We took the chicken teriyaki out, we put the turkey hot dogs in. So we didn't give them good food, we gave them crappy food. We gave them processed food, ultra processed food. We gave them kid food, food kids would eat, but it was no added sugar food. And we gave them a scale. And every day we'd call them up on the phone, what'd you weigh? And if it turned out they were losing weight, eat more, in order to keep weight stable through the entire 10-day period. And then we studied them again. Every aspect of their metabolic health got better, and without change in subcutaneous fat. But the liver fat went down 22%. And as just by switching from sugar to starch, the liver fat went away, and the insulin secretion got better as the fat went away. So we know it was the fat that was, because the liver was sick, the pancreas had to make extra insulin to make the liver do its job. So when you fix the liver, the pancreas got better too. We reversed these kids' metabolic syndrome with no change in calories and no change in weight, which is why a calorie is not a calorie, and a sugar is not a sugar. And to be honest with you, a fat's not a fat, and a protein's not a protein. And the problem is the food industry doesn't want you to know that, which is another reason I had to write the book.
So, okay. So I think we're going to move into diets now, because again, that's where most of these questions are. And so, and that was going to be my segue in, which you already just said, a calorie. And I've been hearing you say this for years. Calorie is as a calorie, sugar is sugar, drives you nuts, and food is what they do to food. We've already covered a little bit about what food manufacturers do to food, but before we go into keto and vegan and specifics of diets and answer these questions, because it's 10 to 11, we're good with time here. Let's start by explaining exactly why a calorie is not a calorie and sugar is not a sugar. Okay. It's not just a sugar. Yeah, sure. Start with that.
Well, I've already kind of explained it to some extent. Let's take an example. Let's take almonds.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
You eat 160 calories in almonds. How many do you absorb? Turns out you absorb 130.
Okay.
You ate 160, you absorb 130. Mm-hmm. Where'd the other 30 go? The fiber in the almonds set up that gel. And so you didn't absorb them early. They went further down the intestine, and the bacteria chewed them up instead. So because those calories came in almonds, those calories weren't for you. They were for your bacteria. You know how when people are pregnant, you say, well, you're eating for 2? Well, we're always eating for 100 trillion. Yeah. Okay. And the question is, how much did you get versus how much did they get? The more ultra processed it is, the more you get. The more unprocessed, the more they get. So even though it passed your lips, even though it registered as a, quote, calorie, who cares? If it didn't enter your bloodstream, what's the difference? In fact, you fed your bacteria, which is a good thing. So a calorie is not a calorie if it came with fiber, because your bacteria got it instead, and you fed your gut. You protected your liver and you fed your gut. That made it healthy, irrespective of the calories. So that's one reason. Second reason, protein. Now, if you're building protein, the amino acids go to making the protein. Fair. But if you're not building protein and you eat protein, where does the protein go? It gets
if you're not building muscle and
right. If you're not building muscle or anything else, or bone, or if you're not in growth phase.
Okay, got it.
Okay? Mm-hmm. You're not a kid and you're growing. Okay. Yeah. Where does the protein go? It gets chopped up into amino acids. The amino acids go to the liver, and the liver is going to turn those amino acids into energy. Now, it turns out, in order to take the amino group off an amino acid and turn it into an organic acid so it can be burned for energy, you have to invest energy. You have to actually sink energy into the process. And so there's a net loss of energy when you're turning a protein calorie into energy as opposed to a carbohydrate calorie. So on net, you derive fewer ATPs. You derive fewer energy molecules because it was a protein. So a calorie is not a calorie because if it was protein, it's not the same as a carbohydrate. Mm-hmm. Fat. So over here on this side, we have omega-3 fatty acids, heart healthy, anti-Alzheimer's, anti-inflammatory, save your life. Single best thing you can put in your body.
Yep.
You find them in marine oils. Over here, you got trans fats, the devil incarnate. Okay. Consumable poison. Okay. And we now know that, and the FDA finally has gotten rid of them out of our food supply. Thank God. Only took them 25 years, really. They're both 9 calories per gram. One will save your life, one will kill you. So a calorie is not a calorie because they have different effects on your metabolic health and on your longevity. And finally, fructose and glucose, like we talked about before. So glucose is the energy of life. Fructose is a completely vestigial molecule that only plants use as an energy source. Okay, it just so happens it's really sweet and it activates the reward center and it's addictive. That's all.
Yeah, that's all. Now, back to a little bit to omega-3 fatty acids, marine, but what about, talk about EPA, DHA, and the differences thereof?
Right. So they're both important. EPA and DHA. EPA stands for eicosapentaenoic acid. DHA stands for docosahexaenoic acid. Do not worry, you will not be quizzed on this, but it is in the book if so as a reference. They're both important. They both are involved in structural membranes, especially in neurons. And so they're very important in terms of brain health and brain development, especially for babies, which is why now they are both put into baby formula to help babies grow their brains. And also they are anti-inflammatory. They activate an immune cascade that basically keeps the immune system from going hog wild. Conversely, we have other fatty acids called omega-6 fatty acids, linoleic acid. This is what's basically in corn oil, soybean oil, a lot of the seed oils. Now, they're important too. It's not that they're bad, okay, but they are the precursors to arachidonic acid, which is pro-inflammatory. That's the inflammatory fatty acid. And it causes prostaglandins. It's the precursor to prostaglandins, which cause pain and inflammation. And you need inflammation because if you didn't have inflammation, you'd be eaten by the maggots. I mean, you would have an immune deficiency. All right. So you need to be able to do that. On the other hand, you don't want to do it too much. And the problem is the more omega-6s you consume, the more you're doing it at baseline, whether you have an infection or not. And so we now know that omega-6s are sort of bad guys in the story, and you don't want to be consuming too many of them. But ultra-processed food is virtually like straight omega-6.
Yeah. Okay, so we have a lot of questions that have come in and I haven't even looked at yet. So, and I think they're mostly about food. I'll read these while you're explaining. I've heard you talk about diet wars. We're talking vegan, keto, you say they're false wars.
Yep.
And then we already talked about the study with the children. But I've heard you say that, you don't need a diet if you eat real food. So talk while I'm going through these audience member questions. Explain the differences of these eating ways people eat, vegan, keto, which are like the opposite extremes, and the kind of the religious fervor.
Right. It's very religious and it's inappropriate. I will tell you, not because it's inappropriate, but to have religious fervor over it is what's inappropriate, because this is not religion. Okay, this is science, and we have the data. Now, I am not against vegan.
Yeah.
I'm also not for it. I'm not against keto. I'm also not for it. I'm for real food. Okay. And vegan can be real food and keto can be real food, but vegan can also not be real food. Yeah. Just like keto cannot be real food. It depends on how you're doing it. So for instance, Coke, Doritos, and Oreos are all vegan. Okay. That doesn't make them good. Clearly. Yeah. So vegan means plants. Okay. I get it. And I also understand that, people are worried about the environment and they're worried about cows.
Yeah.
All right.
And I'll quote you before. Here's your quote about cows. Quote, "The cows are not the friggin' problem." Unquote.
That's right. That is correct. So the cows are not the friggin' problem for two reasons. Okay. The first is when you actually look at the amount of methane produced by cows, it's not that much. It's half of agricultural methane compared to what industry and transportation is doing. It's a drop in the bucket. Yes, it's a drop in the bucket that could be controlled. I don't argue that. But think of it this way. There are three greenhouse gases, not one. There are three. There's carbon dioxide. Now, its heat trapping capacity is low, but there's a whole lot of it. There's nitrous oxide. Its heat trapping capacity is 250 times higher than carbon dioxide. And there's a fair amount of it. And where does it come from? It comes from nitrogen fertilizer that fertilized all the vegetables and the plants, because the cows aren't on the farm pooping and manuring and, fixing the nitrogen in the soil. So instead of it being soil, it's dirt. And if you want to grow corn in dirt, you have to spray it with nitrogen fertilizer so it has something to grow. And that contaminates the water tables, and it ends up, causing dead zones in the Gulf of Mexico and climate change, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And that all came from plants. Mm-hmm. And then finally, there's methane. Now, methane is 25 times more heat trapping than carbon dioxide. So yes, that's a problem, but there's not that much of it. It's actually pretty low. And so on the, big damage scale, and it doesn't last that long in the atmosphere. It only lasts 9 years as compared to carbon dioxide, which lasts 33 years, and nitrous oxide, which lasts 114 years. So on the big scale of the three greenhouse gases, methane is like the lowest. It's the least concerning of all the greenhouse gases. But that's the one cows make. All right? Now, there's another reason to not be mad at the cows. In 1968, there were more heads of cattle in America than there are today. And they made 1/5 the methane that the cows today make. How come there are fewer cows, but 5 times more methane? And the answer is antibiotics.
Antibiotics.
The antibiotics we give to the cows who live on the CAFO basically killed off their regular bacteria, allows the methanogens like Akkermansia and Archaea to populate. And basically, these cows are now, making methane hand over fist compared to what they used to do. But guess what? So are we.
Yeah.
We make more methane too. Okay, no one's talking about getting rid of us. Okay, yeah. It's not the cows, it's what we did to the cows. So let's undo that. Leave the cows alone, take them off the CAFO, put them back on the farm so they can poop and make the corn grow. Okay, that's called regenerative farming. And that's what we need to do to fix the climate change crisis. But we can't do that until we get rid of the food subsidies, because that's what's causing all the growers to grow the wrong stuff in the first place.
Okay. So I'm going to summarize what you said, and then we're going to try to answer some of these questions, but we're going to have to do it quickly because we only have about 5 minutes left. So keto, it's not, like you said, it's not keto, it's not vegan, it is eat real food.
Keto is fine. I have nothing against keto. It's hard to stay on, but if you can stay on it, that's good. If you fall off keto, and it's easy to fall off because, all you have to do is raise your insulin and now you're not on keto anymore. Right. Now you're on a high fat, medium carbohydrate diet, which is like the worst possible diet.
Right. Yeah.
If you're really in keto, fine. I'm a supporter. I'm a fan. No problem. If you're vegan, that's fine too. You can be vegan. I'm not against vegan. Please, you want to be vegan? Fine. Just don't make everybody else vegan.
Yeah.
Real food answers both issues. And to be honest with you, the vegans and the ketos are really on the same side. It's the processed food that's on the other side.
Right. So, okay, let's see if you can do this, Rob. This is going to be interesting. So I'd like to get through in the next 3 minutes, as many of these questions as we can. So see if you can do a really brief answer to these. And I know that these aren't big
one
questions.
part answers.
Okay, one part answers. Do the GMO vegetables that we see at Walmart fall under real food realm? As those also include fiber. Does real food mean organic or conventional? Conventional. One sentence answer.
Right. Organic doesn't mean good. Okay. Organic means no pesticides, but it doesn't mean good. GMO, we don't have the data yet. The only thing we know is glyphosate's a bad guy.
Okay. Got it. Okay. We've already answered these questions. What is your guidance on appropriate alcohol consumption? Is wine nightly okay? 1
glass a day is fine.
How big a glass? There's all sorts of
4 to 5 ounce glass of wine is fine if you're an adult.
Okay.
Not if you're a kid.
Okay. Let's see. By freezing full berries, do we significantly impact the fiber? I think we already covered that one.
Berries have the lowest sugar, highest fiber ratio.
Okay. So are you saying to not consume or cook with frozen vegetables?
No, you can cook with frozen vegetables if you're making a stew. But, frozen vegetables are mushy, and most people don't like mushy.
Yeah, no. Okay, we already answered the question about fatty liver disease being reversed. The risks of serum fructose, does that mean, or fructose, as you say? I've got it, yeah.
Well, we've been fruct is what we've been.
You okay? Does that mean there's a limit to the amount of fresh fruit? No, we already answered this one.
No.
Okay.
Fresh fruit's fine.
Yeah. When you refer to sugars, is it primarily cane sugar and high fructose corn syrup that we need to be concerned about? Or do we also need to limit sugar from fruit, honey, and maple syrup?
So honey, maple syrup, agave, all the same as sucrose and high fructose corn syrup. Fruit is got fiber. The other ones don't.
What is your view on powdered forms of adaptogens and superfoods, please?
Some of them are okay, and some of them are hyped.
I know you don't like to talk about your own diet, but I have 3 questions.
Yeah, I figured.
Yeah, I know. So basically, I can say that I've known you for 12 or 13 years now, and I think you eat pretty well, right?
I used to eat terribly. I used to be the master of the 3-second lunch, because, when you go to medical school, you don't have a whole lot of time to eat. And I used to basically think of, food as an afterthought. But, my work in this field has, certainly changed what I do. And my wife and I used to eat out 3 times a week, and now we eat out maybe once a month, if that.
There you go. So we already talked about the Crohn's disease, love the COVID morbidity and mortality connection to ultra-processed food, lucid description. Okay, that wasn't clear. Dr. David Katz has been a proponent of health and nutrition educator in response to COVID. Please, what are your thoughts about Okay, that was just a comment then. Please, what are your thoughts about fermented foods like cheeses and organic plain yogurt, ingredients only, milk and bacteria, and whole grains, breads? Oh, I was going to bring that up too. Whole grains, there's a difference between a whole grain and an intact grain. Fermented food.
Yogurt is fine. Fermented foods are fine. Nothing wrong with them. Go for it. In fact, they may actually be, helpful in terms of probiotic restitution of your microbiome. In terms of whole grain, it's very simple. Is it really a whole grain? Just because they say it's a whole grain doesn't mean it is. In fact, usually it's not. They can say it because it started with whole grain. As soon as they pulverized it, it ain't whole.
Right.
The horse is out of the barn, the starch is out, it will get absorbed rapidly, and you will be flooding your liver. So if it actually stays as a kernel, so like a wheat berry, then it's fine. As soon as you've taken a mortar and pestle to it, or a mill or pulverizer or whatever else, or eaten any food that's fluffy, you're done. It's just
okay. We're definitely went a little bit over here. I'm going to close out, but I want you to answer one word. Is popcorn high fiber?
Popcorn is not high fiber.
Okay, that's enough of that. So wow, that was a lot of information. That was just amazing. Rapid fire. So I love it.
Lightning round.
That was lightning round. So anyway.
Oh, it goes on password.
So in closing, thank you all for joining us today. And our thanks to Dr. Robert Lustig for your comments here today. The video will soon be posted on the club's website, and we encourage you to visit online at commonwealthclub.org and to view this and other programs. And now the meeting of the Commonwealth Club of California, commemorating 118 years of enlightened discussion, is adjourned.